VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker, and we're here to chat about these 3-4 Vikings that travel to Lambeau Field on Sunday at noon Central Time. And because of Thursday night football, indeed, the Buffalo Bills took care of business like we thought they would against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And at least for 3 days, the Vikings live in the NFC's 7th seed, meaning if the playoffs started today or tomorrow morning for whatever reason, the Vikings would travel to Detroit for a postseason game. So there's a jumbled tiebreaker because of a crowded NFC at the bottom of the playoff standings. And indeed, the Vikings are right there at number 7 thanks to tiebreakers. What a world, because this is like the fall and rise of the 2023 Vikings. Not long ago, like right after the Chiefs beat the Vikings and Justin Jefferson hit IR, we were staring at a 1-4 team trying to figure out, all right, we're out without the best player. Is a fire sale coming? Are they going to mail it in? Kwesi said he doesn't tank, but will he tank this time? And then that's what 2 wins will do. So that's a life lesson. No matter what type of victory, ugly or not, like at Soldier Field, it's a win is a win. And then it catapulted them to defeat the San Francisco 49ers on Monday Night Football. And just like that, thanks to some lucky events in week 7, the Vikings are in the postseason. So that's where we're at. They have a wild card berth that could be stripped from them if they lose to the Packers, which I don't think they'll do. If they lose to the Packers on Sunday, yikes. That means the Packers themselves could have the 7th seed if the Saints lose and the Rams lose. They'd have to lose as well for the Packers to get it. It's way up in the air. But 2-3 weeks ago, we were talking about draft order, and I think that is in the rear view, at least for now. So getting in a little bit of Packers stuff, the Packers are considered the NFL's 25th best team per DVOA, 17th on offense, 27th on defense. So these are not the Packers that you're accustomed to staring at in the face heading into Vikings-Packers week, because there is no Aaron Rodgers, nor is there any Brett Favre. This is the Jordan Love show. It's a dude that looked pretty good for, the first 2 weeks, and since Packers fans have grown frustrated. I've had some Packer fans that are not accustomed to this and said they're moving on to hockey. And I'm like, oh, yeah, 2-4, you don't have much experience with that. But the Packers right now are not very formidable. On that same DVOA coin, the Vikings rank 16th, right in the middle of the league, which is what you would expect from a team that started 1-4 and climbed to 3-4. So it's really not an even matchup. The Vikings are the better team statistically and on paper. However, going to Lambeau Field is never all that easy. The injury stuff, let's talk a little bit about that. So the Vikings are beyond the shadow of a doubt, without Justin Jefferson and Marcus Davenport, which ordinarily we would, grit our teeth and think about how in the world are we going to do this. But once you realize what they could pull off against the 49ers, it's a little bit of a different ball game, because if they can beat the 49ers, who are considered the NFL's best team, maybe with a side dish of the Chiefs, then you can beat them without Jefferson and Davenport. You can beat anybody, perhaps without, subtracting elite teams on the road. I don't know any Vikings fan, even after beating the 49ers, that would feel confident going into Philadelphia, for example, or Buffalo again, and hoping for the best. But the Packers are not in that category for the first time in forever, because Rodgers isn't there. So going into Lambeau isn't as daunting without Jefferson and Davenport. And then the Vikings actually had a practice yesterday. They didn't have to estimate on their injury report like they did on Wednesday. The limited practice participants, TJ Hawkinson, Ezra Cleveland, and Jalen Naylor. Those are guys, if they were DNPs, you'd look at it and say, ooh, I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if they're going to play. But I think Hawkinson is a good bet to play. We're going to wait and see on Jalen Naylor. I'm going to talk about him in a minute. And then Ezra Cleveland is the supreme mystery, because he has to start. He's played so well. Per Pro Football Focus, Ezra Cleveland is the NFL's 9th best guard at the moment. So you really can't bench him just because Reisner looked good and the offensive line was the best you've seen in, a decade? But it also feels like a criminal act to put Reisner back on the bench after you just saw the Vikings' best offensive line performance in a decade. It's too much of a good thing, and we'll take it in terms of that problem. But the Cleveland dynamic is interesting. I expect everything to go back to normal, where Ed Ingram stays at right guard, Cleveland comes into left guard, and then Reisner's on the bench for a rainy day. And the way that my opinion is that Reisner will be the starting left guard in 2024 because you can keep him in the building, not cheap, but will be more affordable than Ezra Cleveland, and then you can let Cleveland walk in free agency to sign his deal for, 3 years and $30 million somewhere, something like that, whatever he'll be able to command. On the Packers depth chart, that is a little bit more interesting. They had a lot of limiteds, and usually when limiteds happen, that means the player is trending at practice to play that week. But the DNPs that did not practice are Jair Alexander and Luke Musgrave. Now, Musgrave looks decent out of the gate. I'm sure he'll be a pretty good tight end, but I don't really care about him. Jair Alexander is the one to watch because once I started Monday morning to formulate, all right, can these Vikings beat those Packers? I got anxiety about Jair Alexander being the guy who would cover Jordan Addison because if Alexander could stop Jefferson last year, I'm going to guess he can stop Addison, with help from safeties and whatnot. I'm going to guess he could stop Addison as well. But I think Alexander was limited in practice on Wednesday, but did not practice on Thursday. So you'll be watching that today on the injury report to see if Alexander is a go. If he is not, then this should certainly be a Vikings dub. But if he's there, then you got to get a little more tense to figure out, all right, well, we don't have Jefferson. They do have Alexander. Can Addison do the thing? But their injury report is ginormous, but most of it is limited practice. So this is a first of its kind experience. This is the first Vikings-Packers game without Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre attached to the roster since 1991. The Vikings did play against Don Majkowski in week 1 of 1992, but Favre was the backup and took over the following week. So it has been 32 years since you experienced a Vikings game without Favre or Rodgers somewhere on the depth chart. Of course, there's been a couple of games where Rodgers was injured. Favre never got injured as a Packer. And then you saw Scott Tolzien in a tie in, 2013? And then the Vikings defeated Brett Hundley, shut him out. 17-0 in December of 2017. But yeah, so since 1991, that was the last time the Vikings played against a Packers team without Favre or Rodgers somewhere on the roster. Jake Reed was a rookie that year. Jerry Burns was the head coach. Black or White by Michael Jackson was the top song in America. And Hook was number 1 at the box office. So it has been over 3 decades. A couple of other items on Jalen Nailor. That is the one that remains fascinating because he has been cleared to return from his IR status. He also had a hamstring, but he's damn fast. And once he's activated, especially if that occurs when Jefferson's still out, he can be a wild card in this Vikings offense because right now it is the Addison show, Osborne doing his WR3 thing, and then Brandon Powell looking pretty good. But Nailor, shined down the stretch of 2022, albeit in garbage time situations. So I would consider when he comes back, Jalen Nailor to be at least a temporary X factor when Justin Jefferson's not playing, because we got to see what he has. We know what we saw in little spots last year when the games didn't mean too much, what he could do. But when you're without your best wide receiver, anybody who is that fast and that has that upside could be used within the offense. So monitor Jalen Nailor's status, whether or not he'll play. He's a crazy draft pick from the 2022 class that everybody spent all summer talking about how trashy and shitty it was. And then, you're 7 weeks into the season. Ed Ingram is on the come up. He looks like he's going to be good. Brian Asamoah will probably be a starter next year. Andrew Booth is finally playing. And by the way, Jalen Nailor, well, we shall see what he's made of. So never, ever, ever adjudicate a draft class a year after. I mean, come on, people. You have to give it time. Yeah, it might not be absolutely dazzling. Like, I think the Vikings, when they fired Rick Spielman and hired Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, they thought they were going to hire the one general manager who hit on every draft pick. That has to be the reason that Kwesi has gotten such criticism. And you'll hear like, oh, what about Booth and C not even playing? And Ingram sucks and nobody else from that draft class is contributing. Well, sometimes it takes longer than one season for players to be good. And then it's so odd when you hear those sob stories about Kwesi because they completely ignore finding Ivan Pace as an undrafted free agent. Don't even mention Addison doing the thing as a, quasi rookie of the year candidate. Those are like moot. All we got to talk about is why Lewis Cine is a healthy scratch. I have a personal timetable for Lewis Cine to determine he's a bust or not, and that's whether or not he starts week 1 of 2024. It's not easy to come back from a snapped leg, and it's very possible that Kwesi's first draft pick could be not good. But I would like to give him the benefit of the doubt, at least until next season, recovering from that leg injury. So Jalen Nailor's status, does he play? And then oddly, this will feel like heresy to say, but this is not an absolutely must-win game for the Vikings. I know that may make you go, what? You can't go to 3-5. But per the numbers, the way the schedule shook out to last week, and because the Vikings beat the 49ers, if they win over the Packers, their playoff probability skyrockets to 60%, 60. And if they lose, it drops down to about 33%, 32%. And then you'd have the Falcons, Saints, Broncos, Bears, and Raiders around the bend. So this schedule, as I've said repeatedly, gets a lot simpler, a lot more straightforward in the coming weeks. So beating the Packers would be wonderful for the momentum, turning around the season. But it's not like if they lose to the Packers at 3-5, they're dead in the water. We've already seen the team rectify a 1-4 start, and they, in theory, could do the same thing if they lost to the Packers. Now, I don't think they'll lose to the Packers, and I'll get to that in a second. The last thing I'll leave you with is the way this season has been turned around almost in a single game. I guess we can credit the Bears game to an extent, but certainly on Monday Night Football, I think we're in this holding pattern or this wait period to determine, is this turnaround more like the 2017 Vikings, which would be somewhat wonderful, or is it more like the 2020 Vikings? In 2017, they lost Sam Bradford in a game at Chicago. He finally petered out, and Case Keenum came in. They got the win, somewhat ugly, and then eventually went on a really sweet run. Dalvin Cook was injured. He never played again that season. So in the face of injuries 6 years ago in 2017, the Vikings decided, well, we're going to get better. That sounds eerily familiar to right now. So I'm clinging to this little bit of hope that this season could emulate 2017. It's a high hope. A lot has to happen for them to win that many games in a row. Otherwise, it could be like 2020, which we've nibbled at on this show and with Josh Fry for about 4 weeks, where started off terrible. The 2020 team was 1-5. And before you knew it, they were 6-6, trying to get in the postseason. That didn't work out. They lost to the Buccaneers. Kendrick Scott hurt in December, and that was damning for an already not good 2020 defense. So yes, spend this Sunday, of course, and then I'd say the next 3 games, if the Vikings go on a little run, which would be wins over the Bears, the 49ers, the Packers, the Falcons, maybe the Saints, this would really start to feel like 2017. Otherwise, if they lose Sunday or they lose the week after that, you're probably looking at a circumstance more like 2020, where they got off to a very poor start, but you knew deep down they weren't a terrible team, but they ultimately ended up, I think, 7-9 that year, and who cares about that type of season? If you see anything less than a playoff trip, and I think a playoff win, I think you're going to see a change at quarterback and even more of the rebuild in the competitive rebuild. All right, alas, my prediction, I do think the Vikings are triumphant. I think they win 27-21 at Green Bay. I would absolutely love for them to finally beat a team by 2 scores or more, or that elusive, they haven't beat a team by 17 points or more since 2019 against the Chargers at StubHub Center, whatever they call that place. I would love to see that. Probably won't happen at Lambeau, but yes, I do think the Vikings win by about 6 points. And I'll be back, I think Sunday night, we're going to talk to Tyler Ireland and Dakota Kep as a reaction after Sunday Night Football. What is that? Bears and Chargers. I think we'll hop on and digest whatever happened in the Vikings game. So, skol, baby.